morning, everyone. Thank you for coming along today. Remember, this forum is your event, not my event. I have some topics that I'd like to discuss. And first of all, before I do that, a massive thank you to Stewart Title for once again organising this event. If you haven't met John and Liz, who are Stewart Title's representatives in Scotland, I would urge you to make contact. Happy, I'm sure, John and Liz, to meet via virtual meeting or to attend to discuss your needs. But Stewart Title are a great organisation that I deal with and have dealt with for many years. And as I say, and my old father used to say to me, it's not the business that you deal with, it's the people that you deal with. And these are lovely people to deal with, very helpful, very keen to assist. And I think, Robert, you've got some things to say, Robert Kelly from England, some things to say about your sort of new platform, etc. So while we're waiting for people, good morning to you, Robert. Could you just share with us what you're doing with regard to the platform to ensure accessibility to your product?
Yeah, certainly, Ian. The Stewart Solution platform does allow you to order a number of policies online. Very simple process to get a draft quote and get a quote and a draft policy in 3 easy steps. We have just done some rework on that now to make it even easier. We included variable assumptions in there so that you're not stuck by hard and fast descriptions of property. You can tailor it to your client's property. Already seeing a number of clients in Scotland signing up to it, so we're very keen to talk to people about that. Liz is our expert on Scottish properties, and we'll be happy to talk to people. We will be including in the follow-up email a short walkthrough video which shows you the main points of it, and then there'll be contact details for Liz to talk to there.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I mean, the other thing is, Robert, if there are sort of bespoke policies or particular needs or requirements, then John and Liz are both happy to sort of either deal with things, as I mentioned, virtually, or attend to sort of discuss requirements. Because from time to time, there will be the need for perhaps a bespoke policy or perhaps even a sort of personal walk through the new system and process. And I guess you're quite comfortable with that within reason, Robert, yeah?
Oh, yeah, no, certainly. I mean, we're not pushing anyone down any route. It's whatever works for you. Online has its advantages, but being able to talk to an expert like John has its advantages as well. So whatever works for you. And similarly, if you start a quote online and it doesn't seem to work, then there's a referral on there back, and we'll be in touch with you afterwards. So it's whatever way works for our clients, really.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Robert. I'll put the contact details on the slide there for John and Elizabeth and Stephen, who is the chair of today's event. If you need to get hold of Robert, again, you can contact him via his address, robert.kelly@stewart.com. I assume, Robert, is your email address?
It is, yes. Yeah, it's as boring as that. Yeah.
Lovely, jolly good. Okay, great. So, topics for today. Well, let's start. What I'd like to do is work from the bottom up and talk about the Building Safety Act, because you know why, Robert. I'm living the Building Safety Act at the moment. I did 5 webinars yesterday, all on the Building Safety Act. I've got 2 to do this afternoon. My life is permanently connected to the dreaded Building Safety Act. And what I did, as promised on previous occasions, is have a look at those aspects of the Building Safety Act that are relevant to Scotland. Got some notes on this if anyone wants, but in essence, what we have are 2 limbs to the Building Safety Act that I think are pertinent to Scotland at this moment in time. First limb, if I just look at my notes again, is some rights extended to new homes. So new homes warranty, the idea of a new home ombudsman scheme to deal with problems or complaints in connection with new homes. So nothing too significant with regard to that. Where there is some significance that I want to share with you is some changes with regard to the law relating to prescription. Extended prescription rights to facilitate claims against contractors or manufacturers who have produced product, cladding or construction products that are defective. So this gives a right of redress to the owner of a building, to persons that own residences within that building, and there's a fairly extensive extension of limitation periods. So you've now got the right to bring a claim going back 15 years or 30 years, depending on when the work or cause of action relates. So do be aware of that. As I say, there's some new notes relating to it that I've sort of produced, basically just explaining for transactional property lawyers, hey, look, just be aware of this. The other thing that's quite interesting is, and again, I've made some notes on this for anyone that's interested, is some information with regard to fire safety. And I'm just looking at the notes that I've made, and I've lost my screen, which is not unusual, but hang on a minute, bear with me. Yeah, I've got some notes that I've prepared in connection with the fire safety regs and Building Scotland Amendment Regulations 2022 concerning fire safety. So if anyone's interested in those, send me a note and I'll send them along to you quite happily. Next thing I want to talk about today is onboarding clients and how we onboard clients and what the market's like. Again, I'm talking to practitioners. I'm seeing a sort of steadying of the market, a quietening of the market. And in some areas in England, we're seeing an element of sort of not panic, but an element of really having that down to batten the hatches. Robert and Stephen, would you say the same thing? Are you encountering that in England? Just waiting for both. And I'd be interested, again, for anyone in Scotland, what's the market like? Are you still as busy as ever? Are you noticing a sort of downturn? Or are you still sort of in panic mode as we get up towards the run towards Christmas? Normally this time of year, conveyances are sort of flat out. But I am noticing in England and Wales, lawyers coming to me and saying, well, we're not as busy as we'd like to be. And some, as I say, are not in panic mode, but getting towards it and thinking about what we're doing in connection with staff, laying off staff, etc. Be interesting to see what's said in the autumn statement this morning to see if there's any boost with regard to the marketplace. Some people are absolutely terrified that the government does something like they did in the past with regard to stamp duty, which just caused mayhem on the last occasion. John, again, from your perspective, what are you seeing in Scotland? Are you seeing that people are telling you that they're busy, they're quiet, or what are you seeing? I'd be interested in your view.
I think there's, I think across the board, we're seeing a range of responses. I think the market is a bit quieter. Basically, just looking at doing a sort of straw poll of the number of for sale boards that I see around about the houses here in Lanarkshire. I see a reduction in the number of for sale boards. Where the market, where there is a bulge, if you like, in the market is rental properties. There appears to be a dearth of rental properties in Scotland, probably because there's a rent cap in Scotland that there isn't in England. So rental properties in, I'm in the sort of Motherwell area. Rental properties in Motherwell, Wishaw and surrounding areas seem to be very scarce at the moment. But that, as far as I'm aware, a lot of lawyers have got out of that market. And most of it's dealt with by estate agents and letting firms. Again, it'd be interesting to see, is anyone seeing a market in sort of buy-to-let investors purchasing? Again, in England, there are a lot of people bailing out of that, to be honest with you, over the last couple of years. But it'd be interesting if the market is hot in Scotland, whether you're seeing clients coming to you that are buying particularly for the buy-to-let market. So interesting, John, that you've got that. Again, anyone else got any views? Someone asked me last week about, how to attract new clients, etc. And I've got a very simple philosophy, to be honest with you. I always say to firms, have a look at the sorts of clients you're attracting currently and ask yourself, how can I attract more? How can I retain what I've got? Or how can I ensure that those that have used me in the past or used my firm in the past think about me in the future? So there's a number of things and a number of steps and measures that can take. One of the things that I think is always useful is think of an excuse to write to former clients. So if there's some news on the, say, property market, like John was saying, if the sort of letting market is particularly buoyant and you've got data or stats or agents telling you about it, then again, provide information to the client if there's some interesting developments with regard to case law or Register of Scotland or whatever it is. Again, just let clients and former clients know. Someone said to me when I was in practice years ago that one of the great things to do is to have a look at your client list or your database and look at clients that you haven't heard of for the last 2 years and think of a reason to contact them. And it might be that you've had some developments with regard to the firm. It might be that some development with regard to conveyancing practice. There might be an exciting bit of news about a new development in your locality or whatever it is. You ping an email to the client and say, you know, are you aware of this and are you aware of that? It generates work. Okay, it might not generate work automatically and immediately, but it works. Every firm that I've ever talked to about that and they've taken it on board say to me it's been positive and we're doing it all the more. The other thing that I think is useful, and again I recommend this all the time, everyone in the firm from a trainee to the senior partner should have a role with regard to business development. And it may be that that business development is simply a question of developing connections, etc., or utilizing existing connections. But I always set a target for people and say, right, find 3 people that can get work for you. And it might be estate agents, it might be, I don't know, members of the badminton club that you go to on a Friday night, or the pub or the social club that you attend. Could be anything. But find 3 people that can refer work to you and just look after them. And if you look after them, they look after you. That's always been my mantra, and it's always worked. The next thing about client retention, I was just looking at some information this morning on this. When you are looking for feedback from clients, right? Invariably, we love feedback where we're all scoring 10 out of 10 and we're fantastic, etc. And we're getting a thank you card and we might get some flowers or some chocolates or whatever, right? That's brilliant. But what benefit do we actually derive from that, apart from you know, having a full tummy or having some nice flowers to take home? What actual benefit does the business derive from positivity? And again, I was just reading an article about this this morning, and someone was saying, and it's always been my view, that I'm not interested in the positives and the lovely comments, albeit they're lovely, etc., and they're a boost. I'm really interested in where we can improve. So I'm really interested in not negativity, but you get the message. You know, the client that says, well, you did this well, but this wasn't done so well, etc. I think that's so valuable. And therefore, you know, one of the things I would say is encourage people to provide feedback and drill down if we're getting negative feedback and try and find out why. And sometimes clients are just negative because, hey, clients are negative. Sometimes they've got a point. Sometimes we can learn something. And again, with clients that are sort of complaining or being awkward or whatever, if we can sort of look at a complaint and dissect it and say to the complainant, well, yeah, you know, thanks very much for that. We've learned something from it. We're going to change our procedures, policies, or whatever as a consequence. Then that can have a positive impact on the complainant, and it also derives benefit from the firm. I was at a conference last week. I think you were there as well, Robert, and there was someone, I think, from the Legal Ombudsman's office. And one of the things I was saying was, you know, when you're getting a complaint from a client, there's a danger to be defensive and negative. And that, generally speaking, ups the odds with regard to the complaint. Whereas if we can look at it as a more positive thing and look at it as a sort of helpful thing, both from the client's perspective and our perspective, often you'll achieve a better outcome. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't work for the Ombudsman over the years. And it's one of the things I always say to practitioners, you know, the danger with complaints is the complaint process leads to more complaints. And I always remember doing some work for a firm, I think it was in Sheffield, and they'd had a complaint from the client, and I kid you not, the complaint file ended up like this. It was massive. And I kid you not, the partner, the head of the conveyancing team, couldn't remember what the complaint was about in the first place. The client was now complaining about everything and anything with regard to the firm's complaints process. And I just said, hey, look, this is ridiculous. You know, it's become a sort of war of attrition, really, is between the firm and the client, and there wasn't going to be any winners. Anyway, Gerald, hi, Gerald. Lots of landlords selling due to the government's attack on them. Yeah, got that in England as well. I think landlords are really suffering at the moment, and certainly with leasehold reform in England and Wales, a lot of landlords are bailing out. They're also bailing out because of tax issues. And so, that of itself leads to a sort of reduction in properties that are available and leads to problems. So, Gerald, what are you? John was saying there in Lanarkshire that there's a sort of dearth of properties that are available to let. What's it like in your area, Gerald? And are you finding landlords selling? And if they are selling, are they having difficulty in selling? Or is there still a sort of base level of people that want to get into that market? Or is the number of landlords that are selling deflating market value in certain localities? Interested in that, Gerald. And anybody else, what do you think? I always think there's Edinburgh as being a sort of a bubble. And that the world can fall apart, etc. But the Edinburgh property market always stays good and always stays well. Gosh, it must have been about 20 years ago. I looked at a flat in Drumshew Garden in Edinburgh, and I thought, crikey, that's a lot of money, and I can't afford it. And I now look at the price of flats in Drumshew Garden, John. I don't know about you if you say them, but you just think, crikey, boy, did I miss out there. Ridiculous. Right, Joe. Yeah, hearing 100 apps, just one rental per property, and that's in Glasgow, Joe. Right, okay. Interesting. And with landlords selling, Gerald, are you finding that that's deflating the value of flats? You'd think if there was such demand, people would be going into that market in Glasgow, Gerald? And yes, Stephen, if anyone wants to put the microphone on, just put your hand up, and happy for you to talk to me. That would be brilliant. So we can unmute you if necessary. So yeah, okay, interesting. As far as workload is concerned, then, and the market is concerned, do people agree that there is a sort of a decline in the number of instructions? So we're not sort of pressing panic buttons, but we are seeing a noticeable dip. Again, I would say, from my experience, that anyone that was going to sell or buy and move in before Christmas instructed us weeks ago. So we're not seeing new sets of instructions at the moment. There's a sort of lull, and perhaps as we get closer towards Christmas, you'll get people proceeding or being willing to proceed on the basis that things will get in motion once everyone gets back to work after Hogmanay, etc. Priyanka, yeah, well, of course we can get a copy of the recording sent to you. It might pay you, Priyanka, to switch off and switch back in again. So I think if we can send a message to Priyanka, because I'm assuming she can't hear me, but if we get a message to her to ask her to log in, or that might help, or we can gladly send a copy of the recording. Okay, so other things I want to talk about with regard to onboarding clients, again, important, the retainer. Speaking to a barrister last week and speaking to a KC last week about this issue, so important to make sure that clients are aware of what we're doing and what our role is in the conveyancing process. So important to make sure if we scope our retainer and telling the client what we're doing and what we're not doing, that we keep the retainer under review. And I was talking to an indemnity insurer and an indemnity insurance broker recently, and both of them mentioned the same thing with regard to claims, something called retainer creep. The idea of saying to a client, we're not going to be doing this, and then as the transaction progresses, for whatever reason, you do that work. The problem there is you're generating a vulnerability with regard to a negligence claim. What insurers are saying is if you are going to do something beyond your retainer, beyond what you said you were going to do when you onboarded the client, make sure you expand the retainer and again confirm in writing what's happening. So important to do that, rather than just do additional work which is beyond the retainer, which generates the potential or vulnerability for claims. On the issue of dealing with client complaints, I mean, sorry to be so negative on a Wednesday morning, but do you have sort of policies for dealing with complaints? The Legal Ombudsman's Office has some really interesting sort of guidance as to how to deal with complaints and how to manage them. And again, that might be useful for people if you haven't seen it or are not aware of it. The idea is that there's a method for handling complaints and dealing with them. Again, insurers, your professional body, will always say, look, if you're doing volume conveyancing, you get complaints. It just goes with the territory. The issue is how you handle them. again, talking to an insurer that was saying to me, if a firm comes to them handling high volumes of resi conveyancing work and they don't have complaints and they don't have claims, then alarm bells start to ring. Because what an insurer will do is look at stats and say, if you're dealing with 1,000 transactions in a year, of that 1,000 transactions, there will be issues, complaints from clients about some, and there is the potential for claims with regard to others. Potential claims, not actual claims. So if they're looking at stats when someone is coming to them for insurance, one of the things they'll have a look at is just, what is the client saying with regard to numbers of claims, numbers of complaints, etc. And again, something scary on the insurance front. Again, an insurance broker saying last week that where firms are doing nothing but residential conveyancing work, so they're a specialist residential conveyancing practice, the number of insurers that are willing to insure those practices is declining, and declining quite rapidly, which again is pretty scary stuff in England. Don't know how bad it is in Scotland. I have got someone from an insurance broker that deals in Scotland coming along to talk to us at some point in the future. And we've also got someone from the Scottish Registry coming to talk to us, and we've also got someone in connection with Mines and Minerals, the coal authority, to talk to us as well. So we're going to have a whole list of sort of speakers coming along for the event next year, or the various events we've got next year. So onboarding clients, again, interesting. Some interesting things there. Just be careful. Do a risk assessment with regard to clients when you're onboarding them. Risk assess the work. Risk assess the transaction, risk assess the client, and risk assess third parties. Again, do a review when you're taking work on board, and keep reviewing risk as the transaction progresses. Next thing I wanted to talk about was dealing with planning. And again, I think this is important. As a residential conveyancer, there's an expectation that your job is to highlight risk. You're not expected, unless you hold yourself out as being so, to be an expert in, say, planning, for example. So all that you're required to do, assuming there are some issues relating to planning, is highlighting to the client the current planning status of the property or building that the client is acquiring, referring the client to any planning conditions, and where the client intends to carry out development work, etc., then it's your choice as to what you do. You could give the client advice with regard to their planning intent, but generally speaking, I would advocate, as a transactional property lawyer, I'm going to tell my client about the current planning status of the building or property that's being acquired. And if they want to instruct in connection with advice concerning planning matters, then that would be a matter for my planning team or somewhere else in my office to deal with. My task is simply to highlight current planning status and to highlight risk associated with any issues arising. Other issues with regard to planning, the use of planning consultants. Again, if your client is intent on carrying out some form of development, make sure that you clarify what your role is with regard to third-party experts, such as planning consultants. So your task is simply to pass on or transmit any information that a planning consultant requires. You're not, I would suggest, involved in instructing the planning consultant or dealing with any issues that the planning consultant raises, unless that's specifically what you want to do. The reason I mention that is I've just seen a claim where the client is saying the lawyer was basically acting as a project manager in connection with the development site, and therefore the solicitor's task, the conveyancer's task, was to ensure that the planning consultant's retainer was sufficient and adequate to meet the client's needs. And the conveyancer is saying, well, no, that wasn't what my job is. You instructed the planning consultant, not me. But again, the problem there was that it wasn't clear in the retainer who was doing what. So again, if you are instructing third parties on behalf of a client, such as a planning consultant, then it's important that the client understands that that's being done externally by the client, and that you won't be getting involved in anything that the planning consultant says or doesn't say, or any planning issues. Same thing with environmental issues and environmental searches and reports. We talked about this last time. Environmental searches and reports. I'm always worried about an environmental search, in that environmental searches contain historical land use, and a report contains risk assessment with regard to that land use. And I'm very interested in making sure that I or my client understand and appreciate just what an environmental search and report is doing. And again, where an environmental search and report reveals contamination or contamination issues, I want my client to understand that any questions or queries relating to it should be directed towards the report provider rather than to me. The next thing I want to talk about that I've mentioned on slide here is climate change and climate change reports. Again, in England and Wales, just to let you know, Law Society guidance last year was, sorry, this year, early this year, it was April, Law Society guidance. You should be advising clients, residential clients and commercial property clients about the need or the availability of a climate change report. Opinion by a barrister called Stephen Troman, KC, great guy, Stephen, lovely man, probably the expert on climate change in England and Wales. He produced a paper or an opinion for a company called Groundsure, and a lot of people think that Stephen was saying you're negligent if you failed to obtain a climate change report for your client. He's not saying that and hasn't said that. What he is saying is you are potentially negligent if you fail to tell the client about the availability of a climate change report. So again, I ask all delegates that are attending today, how many people here, if I was a residential client, would suggest to me that I obtain a climate change report in connection with the property that I'm buying? So Gerald, would you recommend it or advise it, or are you aware of it? Anybody else? Yeah, Elaine, thank you. Yeah, again, I have to say in England, despite the Law Society's guidance, I'll come back to that in a moment, Jim, but despite the Law Society's guidance in England, right, the vast majority of people, mass majority of lawyers are just saying, not interested, don't want to know about it, never heard of it. Exactly the same as I'm getting here, okay? Exactly the same as getting here. But Stephen Troman says, right, that climate change is an issue for society. Climate change will have an impact on property ownership. It'll have an impact on property ownership in three ways. One, it could physically affect the property that your client buys. So your client is buying a property on a hillside location or by a stream or by wherever, and there is a risk that climate change creates more storms, more tree damage, etc. Physical damage to the property. Climate change impacts on ground movement. Interesting. A good friend of mine is involved as a sort of a consultant concerning ground movement, etc., an engineer. And he was saying that things like clays, things like sand react. They react obviously to drought. They react to rain. They also react depending on when the rain or the drought occurs. So sort of seasonal drought, seasonal rain can impact, of course, on the ground conditions and can create movement. But where you get particularly dry spells in the winter or particularly heavy spells of rain in the summer, that can cause more damage than rain or drought in normal times of year. And sometimes it's not rain that's causing the problem, it's drought that causes more problem than rain, depending on ground conditions. So the Law Society's guidance, and it is guidance, and further guidance is going to come for conveyancers, but currently the Law Society's guidance is that you should be advising clients, this is in England, on climate change and highlighting to clients risk. And there are three types of risk. The risk is physical risk to the property, like I've just explored. Something called transition risk, which I hadn't thought of at all, but when you think about it, it makes sense. Transition risk is the fact that the Scottish government might start legislating to try and prevent or mitigate climate change. So there may be regulations, there may be legislation in this parliament or next, this government or future government that says, sorry, you can't have gas boilers, you can't have oil central heating, you've got to have a heat exchange system, you've got to have solar panels, you've got to have electrical vehicle charging points. It could be all manner of legislation and regulation. Some of it compulsory, some of it recommendatory. Nonetheless, the fact that you've bought a property could put you into potential difficulty with regard to compliance. So the actual cost of compliance, the actual physical compliance. If you're living, I don't know, in the middle of Perthshire, a mile and a half down a track, and you've got to have new cabling installed for electrical charging points for vehicles, that's going to be a huge expense. A, can you afford to do it? B, if you don't do it, is that going to affect marketability or value of the property? And then finally, in the Law Society guidance, the guidance is that there's also a risk of damages claims arising from physical risk or transitional risk, claims being brought by you or against you as a consequence of the two types of risk that I just mentioned. Now, Jim mentions, where would you get it from? There are some environmental search companies, Groundsure one, Landmark I think is another, that will actually produce an environmental search and report and a climate change report combined. There are other companies that will produce a climate change report for you. If you're interested, I can get someone to come along at our next meeting and talk a little about climate change reports, etc. That might be quite a useful thing to do. Have you heard of Groundsure? I know Robert and Stephen and the folks at Stewart Title are aware of them. I do quite a lot of work with them. There are others that will produce environmental searches and reports, but they'll also build in climate change. They'll also give you guidance about wording in the retainer or report on title for clients. Now, again, the importance, so what some firms are doing is are saying to clients, look, we're aware of climate change. We're aware that it could have impact on your ownership of residential or commercial property. We're not advising on it. And I think unless the Law Society in Scotland have given you guidance, that is potentially the route to take at the moment. But all I'm doing is flagging up now that in England and Wales, lawyers have been given guidance via the Law Society to ensure that clients are aware of the availability of a climate change report. And what it does, it says, the risk of damage to your property due to storm, due to flooding, due to ground movement is, in the next 5 years, a figure, 15 years and 50 years. Now, how on earth anyone actually gets the data, or whether it's very speculative, I've no idea. But nonetheless, in England and Wales, lawyers have now been told this is an issue that you've got to contemplate and address. So happy to get someone from Groundsure to come along and talk about it. Happy to get some more information to share with you about it. I wouldn't lose any sleep about it. Certainly lawyers in England aren't, and certainly most lawyers in England are just saying, forget it, we're not interested. We've got enough on our plates at the moment, which I can quite understand. But I'm just drawing to your attention to it. The reason that I got interested in it, to be honest with you, is that over the years, I've seen issues that, to start with, were irrelevant from a conveyancing perspective, and that weren't a problem from a conveyancing perspective, all of a sudden becoming a problem. So environmental issues and land contamination, always an issue for commercial property lawyers, but never really an issue for residential conveyancers until probably 20 or 30 years ago. Other areas of law have sort of developed as a consequence of sort of changes and risks sort of have appeared over time, and then practitioners have thought, crikey, we need to do something about it. You just need one client suing a solicitor on the basis that they bought a property and they can't get insurance because of climate change issues or storm damage issues. You just need one client suing a solicitor, being successful, then before you know it, a whole new industry develops with regard to steps and measures that can be taken to prevent claims arising in the future. So again, happy to send some information relating to that. Okay, no one's mentioned any sort of problem areas that they have at the moment. And again, I'm really interested in seeing what people have to say and what the market's like. I mentioned Edinburgh a little earlier. Is Edinburgh still buoyant? Are you finding things sort of slowing down a little bit in Edinburgh as well? And again, Aberdeen a sort of hotbed over the years, isn't it? Is the oil industry, that boom, has that seen a boom in property prices in Aberdeen yet again? While I'm waiting for that, other issues. I was noticing in the conditions, your standard conditions, conditions relating to title indemnity insurance. And I was wondering, did anyone put any special conditions in the contract relating to title indemnity insurance? So I was looking at that this morning, and I thought, well, that's a good idea. I often say in England and Wales, put conditions in the contract if a seller is selling a property with the benefit of title indemnity insurance, or if there's a pre-existing title indemnity insurance put in place. And I note in the Edinburgh property forums conditions that have been drafted, you've got special conditions in there. Elaine, thank you. Normally for time of year, noticeably cooler. Okay. Do you think is that partly sort of an international thing, Elaine? Because certainly in London, people say to me, well, yeah, the international buyers are sort of disappearing or hanging on to the money. I don't, I know a little bit about the Edinburgh market, and it's a peculiar market. I've got that, but I'm not sure to what extent it's peculiar in that it is an international market, or it's peculiar just because it's a hotbed as a sort of a university city, etc., and a capital city, and therefore there's demand because of both of those reasons. Don't know, Elaine, if you could help me on that, that would be good. Okay. Anyone doing any, we talked about residential conveyancing today, but anyone do any sort of mixed use property work? So I don't know, a flat above and a shop below, off licenses and things, anything like that. Anyone doing that sort of work, and anyone encountering any problems with it? While we're doing that, Robert and Stephen, a question for you. I was just saying in England, that, it's very rare that you'll see special conditions being inserted into a contract where there's a pre-existing title indemnity policy, but it's something that I recommend, either that or performing due diligence with regard to the insurer. But in Scotland, I noticed the sort of standard conditions there is, I think, is it condition 35 or 37 or something? There's actual conditions relating to title indemnity policies. Have you seen that, Robert?
And it's funny, I was just going to ask you what those conditions would be, because I'm not aware of them, but it sounds interesting.
Send you a copy. Yeah, I thought it was a great idea. And it's the standard stuff that I normally say. So, the idea about confirming what's been disclosed to the insurer, what the seller's aware of, but the listed. I'll send you a copy of it because it was quite good. Elaine's just commented here about Edinburgh, the market. It's across the board, not necessarily international investors. Okay, that's fine. Thanks for that, Elaine. And what about sort of rural properties then? What's the market like in sort of, rural areas, Perthshire, etc.? Buoyant or quiet? And anyone doing, as I say, mixed use properties, sort of shops with apartments or anything of that nature? And what's that market like? And as a resi conveyancer, would you touch it? Yeah, here we are, 35.2. Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, everyone. That's fun. Yeah, that's great. So just have a look at that. So there you are, Robert. Thank you, Marie.
That's really interesting, because it's one of the points which I always drone on to lawyers about when I'm doing training, is that you need to know these things before you know if the existing policy is worthwhile. So I think that's really interesting. I don't think there's an English equivalent of that at all.
No, there isn't, and it's very sensible. I tell you what, someone said to me years ago that as far as conditions were concerned, there are certain parts of Scotland still where standard conditions aren't used, and I don't know if the position's changed. I forget where it was, or something like Ullapool or somewhere up north. And I was talking to someone, they were saying that there were still certain transactions where they were drafting all the conditions for this particular transaction. It wasn't a high value transaction. It was just a sort of country cottage or something. It was quite bizarre. So are the conditions that we're referring to there, are they of general application and use throughout Scotland now or not? And again, so there we are, Robert. Yeah. The other thing that I think about that is, I always like, as a buyer, to take out a policy, because I'm wary about what the seller has or hasn't done relating to the policy. But if you have these conditions in play, then that alleviates the need for the buyer to worry. So thanks very much for that, Marie. Yeah, that's what I was looking at this morning, and I thought really useful. And Robert, again, something that we could look at and refer to lawyers in England to, because I think it is really, really useful. Yeah. So Gerald, you do find so messing around with standard clauses, but so is that, Gerald, because there are peculiar features of the property, or is it because that's just the way they've done it, or why is that? And do you find it in sort of outlying areas, or might you have a firm in Glasgow or Stirling or whatever that will still use them despite the fact everyone else isn't? Yeah, use across Scotland. Yeah, well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Really does make sense. And I tell you what, there's another question. Does anyone act on transactions where there is a Scottish sale and an English purchase, or vice versa? So trans border work. Again, years ago, I did some work for a firm in Glasgow that was looking to basically create a conveyancing factory for cross-border transactions. And we did some training with them, did some work with them, and looked at it, and they were sort of keen to invest and then backed off. The reason they backed off was the market changed. And again, I thought there wouldn't be enough work of that nature to sort of create a sort of conveyancing factory. I could see why you might have a firm that might have an English lawyer and Scottish lawyers. A lot of the firms in Edinburgh do have that in a commercial context, but not in a resi context. Anyone got any comments on that? Again, interesting to find out about it. Okay, so other stuff that people would like to talk about. Anything, any burning issues, any problems? We talked about mines and minerals last time. Oh, I'll tell you what I've got. If anyone's interested, there was a guy that won a prize for doing a conveyancing checklist. Lovely guy, actually, Paul. And I've asked him for authority if he'll allow me to share that with you. So what I'll do, if anyone's interested, is send that conveyancing checklist out to people if you're interested. I thought it was quite a useful thing. Have you all seen it? Yeah, I'll get that sent out to you. I think it's going to be tweaked a bit, but certainly I've got authority for it to be disclosed to you, and I thought, hey, that's useful. Again, the use of checklists, I think, is so important. It just stops silly mistakes being made. It also sort of is useful as for younger members of staff when you're sort of assisting them with regard to progressing transactions, if they can see the transaction as a whole. So yeah, just drop me a note. I'll put my email address on, and I'll get that sent out to you. I'll also share it with Robert and John and Liz, so everyone can have a look at that. Yeah, okay, Joel, I'll do that. I'll just put it on there. We'll get that shared with you. If I'm getting someone from the Registers of Scotland to come along in the new year, if there's any topics that you'd like to explore or like them to explore, let me know. I have to say, between us, there was a bit of sort of reluctance to get involved, but I don't know what, again, given the fact I explained how popular these events were, then there was some positivity there. But initially, there was a bit of reluctance, which I can understand. The land registry in England get absolutely hammered every time they go anywhere. As Robert, you'll confirm, won't you, that on the sort of circuit, when we're doing conferences and things, the land registry tend to get quite a bit of flack.
Yeah, it's a thankless task being a land registry person at these events. Yeah. But I think from the Register of Scotland seem happier. I think they want to focus on getting the backlog down before they come out, so they should have less reason to be attacked.
Yeah, and to be fair, Robert, very positive to engage with us, which is good. You can imagine that if they're getting lots of flack, I could quite understand why they don't want to get involved. Oh, thank you for that, Cheryl. That could be why, yeah. But certainly they've reached out, certainly that they're willing to come along. So if there are topics, hey, let's have them, and they will get specialists if need be involved with us, which is great. And we've also, as I mentioned, got the Coal Authority coming along, and I think we're going to get someone that sort of specialises in coal mining activity in Scotland, as well as someone in that looks after the entirety of the UK for that. So yeah, Cheryl, you could be right with that. And again, the other thing that I think I would like to do, if there are other topics or other things that you'd like, we've had someone, haven't we, looking at sort of software and case management systems. If there's anything else that you want from a tech perspective, Robert, Stephen, and I have lots and lots of connections with all sorts of tech organizations that do all manner of different things that, to be honest with you, bamboozle me no end. But if there are sort of tech issues that you're interested in, or you've heard or read about things that you'd like to know about, then let me know. I was just speaking to a company recently, and what it does, it migrates hard copy correspondence into electronic format for firms, so it sort of acts as a post room. And again, nothing novel about it, just an interesting concept. Nice firm as well, nice people to talk to. Don't know if you do that or you have that at the moment, but again, in England, there's a lot of that, the idea of sort of dematerializing the office and creating sort of paperless file management systems, etc., in very much in vogue. Other things, surveys and valuations. Interesting question. If I was buying a property in Scotland and you were instructing me, would you all recommend that I have a survey or valuation? Would you advise me as to the choices that are available relating to survey and valuation? And if I obtained a survey or valuation, would you read it and advise me upon it? Well, can I tell you, first of all, that in England and Wales, we have various levels of survey and valuation. The RICS produce a consumer guide to survey and valuation, which I think is invaluable. I'll find out if there's an equivalent in Scotland. There might be, actually. That's a great question. I could find that out. But I always recommend that. And I also recommend that it's important that as a conveyancer, if a survey or valuation is obtained by a client, that the client that it's advised upon. So thanks, Jim. Yeah, the home report. So Jim, would you obviously you're going to read the report, would you advise on it? And Marie, what happens if other inspections are suggested in that report? Do you deal with the further work, or do you say to the client, hey, look, it's down to you? How does that work, Jim and Marie? And have you ever had a sort of risk-averse client that says, no, I want something more than a home report? Yeah. Marie, I think that has to be right. I think it's dangerous if you say, look, we'll instruct someone to deal with it. A, you're not getting paid enough to do it. And B, I think it generates vulnerability. We're back to that point, about sort of, are we transactional property lawyers, or are we project managers? And our insurers certainly don't want us to be project managing. Yeah. And you discuss it. Yeah, tell the client to get further reports. And yes, I think you've got to. I've come across some firms that will say to the client, look, if you're getting a survey, evaluation, home report, whatever you're getting, that's fine. You read it. You do whatever there is recommended in that, or if you've got any inquiries or further investigative work that's necessary, talk to the producer of the report. Keep me out of it. I don't think you can do that. I think you've got to look at it, because the surveyor might reveal something that could be of concern to you with regard to title. I do know firms that say to clients, we won't look at it. Yeah, and thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, often that on behalf of lenders, so it's a recommendation and we tell them they have to. Yeah, okay. Again, so important just to ensure that you are aware of your role in that process, and just to make sure you're not exposing yourself to risks relating to claims. I have seen claims being brought in England where the lawyer has either failed to spot something in a survey or valuation, or has been asked to do something as a consequence and failed to do it. Again, exactly the same principle in Scotland. If you highlight something as an issue and then fail to deal with it, or fail to get an appropriate response relating to it, then that exposes you to a negligence claim. Can I explain? If, for example, I instruct you in connection with a purchase and I say, look, I'm really worried about the seller. I'm not sure, he's evasive, he's this, he's that, he's the other. I don't trust him one bit, okay? If I raise that as an issue to you as my conveyancer, and then you raise it to the other side and say, can we have some form of warranty as to his identity, or can you verify, or whatever it might be, and the seller's conveyancer says, get lost, I'm not doing that, then that creates a problem. The problem is that you've identified the seller's identity as an issue, or a concern, a risk to your client, and you haven't had a satisfactory response from the seller that alleviates or removes or mitigates that risk. So it's still live and active. If it were to transpire that the seller was a fraudster and that there was fraud being perpetrated by that seller as against your client, the fact that you've raised this as an issue and not dealt with it would, generally speaking, generate liability for negligence. So whenever you're raising issues, it's important that the issue is resolved one way or the other. The resolution might be, Mr. Client, I'm sorry, but the risk that you've identified is a risk, and I can't do anything that satisfies or alleviates or removes that risk. But you can't just leave things. Hi, Ian McDonald, good to hear from you. Home reports have a section, matters for solicitors. Yeah, you've got to do that. You've got to look at it, okay? And again, report to the client about any issues that the surveyor highlights. You must do that. And again, report it to the client so the client is aware that those issues have been addressed and dealt with. Remember, again, when you're onboarding a client, when you're accepting instructions, make sure the client understands that you won't be able to give advice with regard to value of the property unless you're comfortable in doing it. You won't be able to give advice relating to the state and condition of the property, again, unless you're comfortable. That your task is simply to advise clients about issues relevant to transaction. I don't know if I mentioned this to you in the past, but there's an important point that there's a base level of service that a conveyancer is expected to provide a client. So it doesn't matter what you say in the retainer, how you attempt to limit or reduce your potential liability, there's always a base level of service that's necessary. Yeah, so thanks for that, Cheryl, and thanks for that, Ian. That's a great point. Yeah, thank you. There was something else I was going to discuss. Yeah. I think when we first got together, I talked a little bit about client objective. Would you always ask a client why they're buying a property or why they're selling it? Particularly if they're buying property, would you say, hey, why are you buying the property? Or is there just an assumption that we're a residential conveyancer, it's a property that's a residential property, and therefore it's a standard residential purchase? The reason I mention that is that there are claims in England where a client might have an objective that is, yes, to acquire a residential property, but there's a motive or an additional objective sitting behind it. So I'm buying this property. Yes, it's a residential property, but my plan is to let it out as a holiday let. Or I'm buying this property as a accommodation for my daughter while she's at university. Yeah. I think it's important, Cheryl, that we identify objective. Commercial lawyers always do, property lawyers always do, but residential, there's a danger. Well, it's a residential purchase. Well, yeah, it might be, but there might be an additional motive sitting behind it. As I say, like we were talking with Joe a little earlier, I'm buying it as a buy-to-let investment. I'm buying it for my elderly parents to live in, my daughter who's going to university to live in. I'm buying it on the basis I'm going to flip it, do it up and flip it, homes under a hammer type of position. Susan, yes. Hi, Susan. No problem if you've got to go, that's fine. Yes, of course, we'll get a copy of the recording. And Susan, send me a note via email and we'll get that questionnaire thing sent to you, that might be used, the checklist thing. I'll get that sent to you, okay? Happy to do that. Thanks, Susan. Have a lovely day. Okay, anyone else we've got the last 3 or 4 minutes. Any other issues or topics? One of the things with regard to these forums, and they're really, really popular, is that once we get traction, people will send emails. Hey, I've just encountered this. What would you do? Or I've just seen this really unusual reference, or I've just seen a title with this particular problem. I've never seen it before. Or I've got a solicitor or conveyancer on the other side saying I need to do this or I need to do that. Again, it's a sort of an opportunity for exploration of all manner of different things. It's not me saying, hey, let's talk about this. I get shouted at by Stephen Smith from Stewart Title for droning. So any opportunity that means that you've got topics that you want to talk about, hey, I'm delighted. And Stephen is even more delighted, I'm sure. Isn't that right, Stephen? Going on then.
Actually, Steve,
He's gone.
Yes, Stephen's still laughing, so I thought I'd come in here. Yes, just to say on the matter of recordings, we will send a copy of the recording to everyone that's attended today. And also, just for future knowledge, if you register and then unfortunately work gets in the way, we will send a copy of the recording to everyone that's registered as well. So you can use it there. Brilliant. And obviously you're quite free to use it for training with your team or whatever. Yeah. It takes a couple of days for the recording to be sorted. We try and make you look a bit prettier, Ian. So that takes a while. And then get the sound sorted. Yeah. So it will be out in the next couple of days to you.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. So, Robert, I hope you're not going to do, as my daughter, I see every now and again, little pictures with a little nose and whiskers and all a bit. I don't want any of that, mind, when you're doing you're improving my looks and my clothing and attire, etc. Okay, so you can dodge that. That would be great. Okay, yeah, Margot, drop me a note. We'll get that sent out. So, to summarise, topics for next time, please. Speakers or guests that you'd like, any information that you'd like. Between Robert, Stephen, myself, John and Liz, we know lots and lots of different organisations. We have friends that can provide guidance, assistance, etc., and lots of different areas, and we're happy to help. This is your event. This hour is down to you, and I'm conscious of the fact that I want to provide you with a service and provide you with value. And that service and that value is expanded by you telling me, hey, we need this. We'd like you to talk about that. We want to hear from this person. We want to hear from that. All of that is fine. So on that, yeah, Gerald. Right, in relation to that, has anyone ever seen us to provide a statute declaration from you confirming you know no reason why the said power of attorney will not be suspended at settlement to satisfy lenders? Gerald, okay, I'm going to take a copy of that. In fact, I might take a picture of it, or if we can, make sure that someone does. And Gerald, that's going to be our first topic for next time. Stephen, thank you very much indeed. So can anyone answer Gerald's question at the moment? If we can't, I know we're running out of time. So Gerald, I'm going to try and take a copy of that because I haven't got my phone with me. Oh, there we go. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to deal with that as item number 1 on our next occasion. No, everyone's saying never been asked. So Gerald, Jim's saying get lost. Never been asked. No, it's unusual. I'm going to have a look at it and see if I can find out for you. But thanks, everyone. So, Gerald, I think we take Jim's heed on that one, don't we? But I'll have a look. But anything like that, let me know. Right? Yeah. Let me know and we'll have a look. So, with time is catching up on us, what I'd like to do is to thank John, to thank Liz, to thank Robert and Stephen from Stewart Title for coming along. To thank you for all spending your time with me. I really do enjoy these events. To be honest, it's the highlight of my month, to be able to sit down with professionals and have a look and explore different issues. I find it really, really interesting and really useful, and I hope you do too. So thank you so much for coming along today. Thank you for your assistance. Gerald, item number 1 next time is we'll have a look and see if we can find anything. Speakers, topics, let me know. John, always a pleasure. Liz, always a pleasure too. Thank you all for coming along. Kimberly, you are very quiet today, Kimberly. Again, you're more than welcome to join in. If you want the checklist, send me an email. We'll get that out to you, no problem at all. Robert and Stephen and John and Liz will send you some information about their new platform to have a look at. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Leonie. Lovely. Take care, everyone. Thank you very much, Jasmine. Speak soon, and thank you for coming along. Thanks, Gerald. Thanks, Elaine. Take care. Bye-bye.